in the process of setting up our live feed, and we're also running it via Zoom and
it's setting up the live feed right now, Tony. Redirection to the Facebook Live page.
And you realise, Avery, that you're on the other live feed. So is it still working?
Yep.
Okie dokie. And I guess people will be able to see whether or not that live feed is being produced on, I'll just check myself, and then we'll do the intro again. So just want to welcome everybody to our live feed. This is our virtual town hall, and we've had some technical difficulties, primarily because for some reason I can't get into Facebook and do a live feed. So I don't know what I've done to offend anybody, or whether we've used up our maximum amount of time, if they have such a thing. But nevertheless, we are here, and Avery's organised for us to do the live feed via Zoom. So hopefully that's also working, and we hope that, as of last time, that many of you engage with us while we're doing our feed across the nation and around the world. So welcome to have everybody with us. We've got a very interesting group of people to discuss with us some issues that have been happening around Australia in relation to child protection in particular. And we're also got some fabulous topics to talk about. But our theme, though, is access to legal services. And I just wanted to make a couple of comments before we introduce everybody to you. And that is that access to legal services are diminishing over time, primarily because the government has decided that, for whatever reason, that it is unhelpful for people that have got the least resources available to them, and that are on the lowest possible incomes, that are the most devalued person in the world, for whatever reason, don't require legal services. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, of course, we've got the wealthy people and the middle class who normally can afford legal services when required, and they're easily available generally to them. If you're a criminal, you certainly will get some legal representation. But if you're in the child protection space, it's unlikely that you're going to receive the assistance that you may necessarily require. So tonight, to talk about some of those issues, we have Tony Grange, who's going to talk to us in a moment about the services that are available around family court, I guess, as well, because that's her area of expertise, and probably around child protection area space as well. So we want you to contribute to this conversation where possible. If you're watching on Facebook, contribute. If you're watching across YouTube, then contribute as well. If you're watching this video later on, then comment, add comments, and contact us if you've got any particular issues that you'd like to discuss or have resolved. So firstly, I guess we'll go over to the mediator of this session, who is none other than Avery Hilditch. Hi, Avery.
Good. How are you? I hope everybody else is well, watching and taking part now.
Yes, pretty good. I've just messed up my screen, so I have to change that. Bear with. So
one thing I'm
on live screen. There we go.
One thing I'm going to do is to share the link to this Zoom meeting. So if there's anybody watching the program who would like to join in, appear on the live on here and talk to us, just click the link and I'll let you in, and you can have your say.
Fantastic. So is there any other forms of introduction you would like to do, Avery, before we get underway with the other speakers?
Nothing else from me.
All right, so we'll go with Tony, and I will bring her up. And so welcome, Tony. Glad to see you here.
Hello, Tony. How are you?
Yeah, I'm excellent.
Tony.
Thanks. Yeah,
good afternoon, everybody.
One has an I, the other one is Y. So as usual, thanks for being a part of this process as well. And we'll just give you an opportunity to talk about family law or the legal services, particularly, I guess, from a consumer's perspective.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about that, go for it.
Okay, so what I'm going to discuss today is basically legal representation. I'm probably mainly going to concentrate on legal representation for family court cases and docs or child safety, however you refer to that department. So firstly, I'd like to say that I'm going to echo basically Tony's comments and state that, yes, legal aid services are very fast depleting because the government is not basically providing sufficient budget and resources in terms of lawyers to fight, especially in terms of child protection, safety cases, and also family court cases. So they're basically the options that are available for people in these situations is basically, so the first one would be community legal centres, women's and men's legal centres. There is something called court duty lawyers who are basically within the court where you would need to make an appointment with them. Humanitarian centres such as Salvos also provide these services, but one point I'd like to make is that with these centres, they can only provide you with free legal information and advice, and their advice is very limited. Generally, you can only make a 1-hour appointment, which, of course, if your case is quite a large case or quite a complex or ongoing case, 1 hour is not going to be sufficient. In terms of court duty lawyers, many of them will not make an appointment with you if there are any kind of conflict of interest, i.e. if the other party has sought. What was that?
It was just Avery pressed the recording button, I think.
We didn't
That's exactly
record
what
then?
happened there. Yeah, it's being
No,
recorded.
we haven't been recording.
No, it doesn't matter. We can always download it from Facebook.
So do I repeat what I just said?
No,
or-
that's fine.
Sorry.
Keep going.
I'll turn this recording off and we'll just grab it from Facebook.
Okay, cool. And
Sorry about that.
so basically when it comes to any lawyers, they will always question, they'll always try to ascertain if there's any kind of conflict of interest. So that will basically mean if the other party has already sought consultation with them, not necessarily have taken on the case, you will not be allowed to see or speak to that lawyer at all. Now, the one thing that I was always questioning when I was in the process or in the system was how long is that valid for? And I never actually received a reply. So maybe if there's some viewer out there who can actually say, you know, that conflict of interest applies for only a year, or confirm something, because not even the lawyers were able to answer that question. So the next port of call for most people is basically legal aid. So each state and territory will have their own legal aid office, and these are the only place basically who are going to help you and actually represent you on your behalf in the court case. You may be lucky enough to have a pro bono lawyer that's been assigned either by the court or by the Pro Bono Society, but they generally do not involve themselves in any child protection cases or family law cases. Also, there is, so legal aid, you basically Google legal aid and you'll see the assistance that they offer on the website. You will need to do an application to legal aid, and basically in that application you'll also have to divulge all your financial information, because they will assess you in terms of the information you provide and the finances that you have and assets, and they have a certain threshold of which I'm not aware of what the threshold is, so I can't state it, but there aren't that many people who receive free legal aid representation in court, due once again to budget and resourcing. Now, that will force many people into self-representing their case. And documentation for Australia basically states that self-representation is increasing in Australia and also internationally. for many reasons, because you can't get, it's not easy to get legal aid assistance and representation. The budget, like I said, is depleting for legal aid services, and they might only like do a quota of 10 hours on your case, and then they basically, you know, say you need to self-represent yourself. So self-representing litigants are on the rise, both nationally and internationally, and in Australia, it's been quoted as being at 35% for self-representing in a case. So I'll just basically do a quick overview of the advantages and disadvantages of the self-representation in court. So for the advantages of self-representation, of course, the first major issue is that if you're not granted legal aid, you really have no choice but to self-represent, because you might be totally ineligible for legal aid representation. Okay, lawyers are obviously extremely expensive, as everyone knows, and you might choose, even if you do have some finances or assets, you might personally choose not to, say, like, waste your assets and self-represent instead, so that you save your money. Hiring a lawyer will quickly deplete your funds and assets. Like, I have known many people who have basically sold their assets and sold their homes to basically have a lawyer fight for their case, yet they have still lost the case. The private lawyer has still lost their case. So you need to be aware of that. Lawyers, so for me, the biggest thing I would say is that no one knows your case better than yourself, and that lawyers will not fight for your case as well as you possibly could. Now, having said that, you of course need to be articulate enough and educated, and you need to know some parts of the law, or at least, you know, familiarize yourself with the law to be able to self-represent in the first place. The next thing is that no lawyer
Can I just ask
Yep.
you a question around that, if you wouldn't mind for a second?
Certainly.
And that is, what would be the number, or have you got a sense as to how many people would have the ability, not that they're not intelligent, I'm not suggesting that for a moment, because a lot of lawyers, I think, aren't necessarily all that bright, but the type of qualities that you would require to self-represent, though, I don't know whether a lot of people would have them. I mean, I don't even know whether I would be able to do that adequately.
Okay.
What's your views on that?
Okay, so number one, most cases, especially if you're going to consider child protection cases, you will need to invest a hell of a lot of time in your case. I can say for myself, that's all I did was legal work. That's all I basically did when I was self-representing. I was researching everything. So the qualities that you would need are basically, you would need to, it's not necessary that you have a degree or anything, but if you can actually be able to you need to know the court system, you need to know the administration of the court system and what kind of applications need to be used. I mean, having said that, it might be difficult for you to figure out, you know, whether it's an application in case or a new application, and you might go and ask, say, the legal aid, like the court office, the court registry, for opinion and advice, and some of them can't even answer that question either. And so you need to trottle off and get a lawyer's advice on what application you need to start with. You need persistence. You need to be able to do a hell of a lot of research, like on court processes, court protocol, all the various legislation and the acts. You need a lot of tenacity. You need to be try to be as articulate as possible. Another thing I suggest is that when you go into court, you also need to have a lot of skills in cross-examining the other party. And I think that's where I fell down quite a bit, because there are particular ways of asking the question And of course, if you haven't had legal aid, legal education behind you, you have no idea on how to actually ask the question the way you're supposed to. That's where I think a lawyer, of course, has all that skills, experience, knowledge, and expertise to do that. Have I answered the question? Tony? Someone? Can you hear me?
Hold on, just unmuting, so it took a bit of an
Oh.
effort.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think that kind of answers the question. I guess my primary concern is that people may think that they can go and self-represent and then be grossly disappointed when it just doesn't turn out the way that they would have liked. And I just need to say too, Tony, that I've worked with some people who I think are extremely together around this sort of stuff, and they have lost their cases. And then I've worked with others who have had a barrister, for example, working for them, and they also have lost their cases.
Lost the case.
So, you know, the court system is unpredictable either way. And I think we need to be pretty mindful of that. I think that, do you think that self-representation is kind of like better than, well, actually, it's probably better than doing absolutely nothing and allowing it to go through to a
certainly.
Dom or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's better than taking no action at all. I mean, what are you going to do? So basically, I mean, you know, if you've been refused, you can only receive legal advice, okay, from all those other organisations that I spoke about. And if legal aid and pro bono services are not available to you, you have no choice but to self-represent. I mean,
yeah.
So, you know, whether you think you're, you know, qualified or not qualified, or, you know, able to fight the case on your own. I mean, if you have no money and no funds to pay for the case, you have no choice. So you have to self-represent. And like I said, there's 35 people.
And I guess also,
you know, to self-represent because
yep,
my internet is going, I think.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to that. I think
okay.
I just wanted to add to that that it is better probably for a lot of people to at least have that sense that they've made the fight, you know, that they've put in the effort, and even though they may not get what they want, at least they've fought for it, you know.
You've at least tried.
Yeah,
that's right.
Spot on.
Exactly. The other when you self-represent is basically you're fighting your case in court. Now, having had like a legal aid lawyer, I could say that they didn't fight the case at all. And when I asked them like to, you know, contest something in court, they refused to do so. So if you want to contest something in court and you're self-representing, then you do so. I mean, when you have a lawyer, you can't, they act on your behalf and you can't speak at all. So you're relying on them to take action and fight in your case, but they don't necessarily do that all the time. And that also includes with private lawyers. So is there any questions in regards to that now?
Anybody else online that's got anything they'd like to question Tony over?
Clinton has asked if anybody watching has got any experience in self-representation, saying he'd love to hear from us. That is, hear from them. It's very true. We would like to. I've put a link where people can join the Zoom conversation, but other than that, there's been no questions have been put up.
Okay. So I'll just go on to the disadvantages of self-representation, which of course are many. First of all, you have no legal background, skills, knowledge, or experience of the legislation, no cross-examination experience or contesting the claims of the opposing party, which of course most lawyers, I'll say most, not all, obviously do. Whether they apply those skills in court is another matter. Clients, of course, have a limited knowledge. Self-representing clients have a limited knowledge of the court process and the protocol and the administration and submission of court documents. So that will obviously mean that, you know, if you've put on, you might have submitted piece of documentation to court and you get to the court registry ready for it to be stamped and filed, you're told that you've put it on the wrong documentation. You've got to go back home again and start all over again to put it on the correct form. Clients, self-representing clients must present evidence in case, when you're presenting evidence in the case, you need to refer to specific legislation. And of course, if you haven't researched the legislation surrounding your case appropriately, you won't be able to refer to the legislation, the section, or the clause, which of course gives you issues in court with a judge. The other disadvantages are basically the court system isn't set up to accommodate self-representing litigants. There's a lot of comments made by judges that, you know, self-representing litigants seek the judge's assistance. And then of course they're saying that if the judge provides any assistance whatsoever, that he's biasing the case because the assistance is provided to the self-representing litigant and not to the other party. I have my own opinions of that. I think, well, if the other party has a lawyer and a barrister in the case, they don't really need any more assistance, and the self-representing litigant does. So the other big reasons, the other big disadvantages are when a party has a lawyer or barrister, they're able to get, say, whatever they generally request in terms of subpoena or other documentation. They are generally honoured by the judge. The request is generally honoured by the judge. But when it comes to self-representing litigants, the request generally isn't. And the other issue with the matter is that, say, for instance, the other party might ask for, you know, several subpoenas from Child Safety Department. And they'll make a request that the subpoena needs to be furnished by a particular deadline, that subpoena will be furnished by that deadline, and the judge will also pursue that it is furnished by that deadline. However, like I will say in my case, I also requested a subpoena from Child Safety Department. The judge did not pursue the Child Safety Department to provide that subpoena on time. And in fact, my whole case was finished and done with about a month later. That's when the Child Safety Department contacted me to start furnishing my request.
Okay. If you just like to just conclude, if you wouldn't mind. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah. Of course, lawyers are more equipped in accessing legal information than you are, and other information that might be required from organisations that's like counselling centres or psychologists. And that's it. Yeah, I think I've finished basically what I've wanted to say.
Yeah, fabulous. I think you raised a number of issues just in relation to how we approach dealing with self-representation. I think they were really great points that you made. And I think it was important to understand that there are occasions when people won't get funding. And, you know, sometimes that is, Tony, also because they've either received funding for other cases along the way, or particularly in the child protection space where people where it is deemed by legal aid that they're just not going to win the case. So what often we find here in South Australia is that people who are applying in the first instance to contest an order, for the first part of that process, which is through the hearing process, they're usually granted some form of legal aid. And the second part of it is when they choose to not abide by what the department wishes, and they contest their order. And then it's when it goes to trial that we find the legal aid is tended to get pulled, which is a bit of a shame because they have it most. Well, absolutely. That's when you're fighting. You're right. That's when you're fighting the battle.
That's when you need it the most, at the trial.
Yeah. So what we do, I guess happens is then either people tend to agree with whatever the order is, and the lawyer will inappropriately tell them they can come back and fight for it in 12 months, 24 months time, which is not
doesn't
necessarily
happen.
doesn't happen. That's right. So Tony, thank you very much again. Very, very
Thank you.
helpful. We're now going to move on to Paul Sluter, and Paul's going to talk to us about his views on this very subject, and also some issues around, as a teacher, some issues around education.
Right. Before we do, Tony, Peter Moore has commented. He agrees with Tony Grange. Lawyers rarely put across your words and perspective, and some lawyers are just incompetent. Now over to Paul Sluter.
Yeah.
Mike's yours, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I learned a lot from you today. That was really, really interesting. I've just explained.
Paul.
Yeah, no, it's really
You
good.
guys are cutting out.
Just to explain my position, we got a phone call 8 years ago to hand in our child. No, we had no idea. Before that, there was any issues. My partner was accused of various bits and pieces. So we're on the side of trying to get our child back into our care. So that's the position I'm coming from. I thought Tony's overall thing was really, really good. I'd probably add to one thing. We have a very good legal aid phone service in Tasmania. They're on 1300 366 111. And you can find there's legal services all throughout Australia and all the Australian states. But Tasmania, I have dealt with the New South Wales one. There's lots of phone menus and stuff, but the Tasmanian one is especially good, and they will tend to, if they can't find out something, you get right through to somebody straight away and you can ask a question. I know somebody who was in the process of handling their own divorce settlement or something, and she used this service all the time. So they're really good. I've found lawyers a little bit like going to the dentist. So there's a public one, which I have friends use, and things can drag on for a long, long time. And there's also private ones that will charge you for every word they read. They charge you for opening documents. It's all, lawyers charge on time. So if you go and see a lawyer, you have to have put the emotion aside if you can, but they will write your questions down. When you go and see them, ask them if you can record the conversation, or if they're not happy with that, make sure you write down all the answers yourself. Don't get them to send you a summary of what you've talked about. That'll just cost you more money. It was interesting what you said about self-representation. I feel like I've got a background in teaching. I'm an infant teacher, and I think we will I will try and self-represent myself in about 2 months' time. But I thought that was really interesting what Tony said about knowing how to examine yourself. Now, I bumped into an ABC journalist one day, and I said, I was in court for something or other, and I said, this is really interesting, this being here, isn't it? You must get a lot of stories. She said, it's the best entertainment in town, and it's all free. So, the courts are free. You can go in there with very few exceptions, and child protection cases being one of them. You can go down and you can sit in these magistrates' courts, and you can watch these people and learn from the way they cross-examine people, the questions they asked. A typical one would be, you're a child protection worker, so you would be an expert in the United Nations rights of the child or something like that. And then they'll start, okay, if you're an expert, then why did you do this? So there's all these different techniques that you can watch and you can learn. Unfortunately, child protection cases are closed. You can't get in there, so you can't learn. You can't see what other lawyers do in a child protection case. And I'm sure there's lots of tricks that I have no idea about. The other thing I just wanted to mention, advocates. There's These child protection workers, I mean, they are people too. They have emotions, despite what you think sometimes. They're usually they're an underfunded organisation. They're often run off their feet. It's a tough gig work. I would not like to be in their shoes as a social worker, having to do with parents and having to talk about separation. And I take my hats off to them. But you must remember that when they get to their PCs on Monday morning and they see all their emails and all the phone calls they've got to make, you know, who do you think comes to the top of the list? It's going to be the people that they're not going to have an argument with, people who can be reasonable and can not get too emotional. So for that reason, it's really quite hard. I mean, I've stood up and represented myself in some of these child protection things that, not hearings, but mentions and all the other directions hearings and those types of things. And I've just burst into tears, such as the emotion. So there's a really, I just want to talk a little bit about advocates. Now, if you go hunting for advocates, you will more than likely bump, I just did a quick search before we came online today. You can very quickly find plenty of children's advocates. I heard an interview on the ABC News last week about life without barriers, I think it was. The lady who was speaking, I can't remember her full name, I think it was Catherine. She talked quite a bit about all the services that are available for children. But when it comes to parents and parents' predicament, it's hard for us, for example, to make friends with other people, other parents in our situation. And there's 3,000 parents in Tasmania alone that are in our predicament, say that have children out of home orders. And there's 130,000 across Australia who will go to bed tonight without their children being under their roof. That's a huge number. And considering you can get, you can get on the media and the press quite easily for the most mundane little things, a cat up a tree or something, down a hole or something. It's very hard to, as a parent, to get any media exposure. But there's also the Red Cross that will give you, they do have a Parents and Friends Advocacy Service, or PFAS, not to be confused with the RAAF, We Decide. That's the most likely thing you're going to find. So you have to type that in, Parents and Friends Advocacy Service. And what they will do, they're mostly volunteers. We've used them a few times. So volunteers have got a bit of a lifespan, obviously. So they will listen to you, and then they will go with you and meet with the child protection people when you can work at a meeting time, and they will put their case, they will speak on your behalf. Now, there's a really, I went to see a guy by the name of Josh Willey, who is our Labor opposition spokesman for this space in Tasmania. He gave me this book, and I just want you to try and remember that name there. It's called From Pariah to Partner. This book was done by the written in around the New York City Child Protection Service. It dates back to, I think it's the 70s, reprinted in 2013. So what they found was that if they used, I'll just put that there so you can read the banner of it. Pariah basically means a beggar, somebody who's a bit of a pauper in society, somebody who's downtrodden, and that is kind of how we feel sometimes. If we go around saying we don't have a child with us because it tends to be a bit of a shabby look at times. So pariah means somebody downtrodden in society. So from pariah to partner, so somebody who actually works with. So this book's not too bad, but I would probably stick to the end bits of it and the summaries at the end. That's if you want to get it in a nutshell. But what they found, there was a huge decrease once they used partners, once they used parents who had been through the process, understood what it was like for child removal, and those parents actually work with child protection workers, a lot of the emotion was diffused. The child protection people could understand where the parents were coming from, the issues they had, why they had drug problems, why they did what they do. And they move. Look, I'll find the percentages in a minute later on after other people have spoken, but it was a massive decrease. I think it was something like 65,000 a year to something like 17,000. And that was over like a 15-year period. Don't quote me on that. I'll check up. So advocacy, get someone to speak for you. And look, I'll talk, because I am a teacher, I'll probably, the other thing I wanted to mention is that in child protection orders, that you have the capacity to vary an order. You can do that at any time. You don't have to wait till a child protection worker or somebody's, the courts hand you an affidavit. You can go and do that yourself. You can get some help, obviously, with a lawyer. The other thing you can do is you can revoke an order. So if you believe you haven't been fairly treated and you've got a, not that child protection courts necessarily have to, they're a place where evidence doesn't necessarily apply. It's more about the balance of probability. So if you've kept a diary and you've got dates of phone calls and comments and you're organised, and if you think you might going to lose it, just email every little event to yourself on your email thing, and that way you won't lose it or burn it or eat it or something. So you have those options open to you to revoke an order. It can be done. You don't have to wait. So try and keep that diary. The other thing I wanted to mention, because I work in the education space, not all that often, I work as a relief teacher, usually in a high school, is that I come across a lot of teachers who have absolutely very little idea of how this child protection system works. I run a Facebook site called Relief Teacher Tasmania. I started it up about 5 years ago when we had about a few mates and I didn't really know how to contact each other. But now we have in excess of 500 people on that site. So, and I've raised this question a little bit about child protection, and most teachers I know really don't have a great understanding of how it works. So what I have thought about is inviting child protection workers to come out and talk to staff, or to produce a teacher's pack. So teachers can get up and educate each other about where this child protection, where it all goes. And also I have spoken to some of my classes about child protection, how it works, its positives, its negatives, how it works in court, and about the UNCRC. So I guess that's one thing that people should be familiar with. The United Nations Rights of the Child, it's called the UNCRC. You can look it up you can just Google it. There's about 42 rights of the child. And most people don't have to ever think about them, but they are things like every child has the right to have a name. Every child has the right to free education until they're 16, I think it is. Every child the best place for a child is with its parents, unless there's a good reason why not. It also says that child protection agencies need to be competent. I sometimes have issues with that. So there's a really good starting point to see how you feel about if your child's rights are being upheld properly or not. Now, the last thing I want to mention to you is I just want to show you a little fellow here, and he's asleep at the moment. But Shelton, this is our dog. And I can't tell you what a difference that's made in our lives. We have a reason to go out of the house every day. We have a reason to, we look after someone else. And I'm not saying it's a replacement, but by gee, it's certainly made such a such a positive change in their lives. Well, that's all I'm going to mention for now. If there's any questions.
I think there is a question from Clinton. Is that right, Avery?
I actually just wanted to make a comment, if I could. I think with advocacy, I think it's really great, but I think where we get it wrong is it's funded by the statutory child protection authorities in each state and territory. A big thing in Western Australia is we have a lot of NGOs, not-for-profits, that are funded by the department, and you're not going to bite the hand that feeds you. So you're not going to go up against the department and say this is wrong if the money is coming from the same place that you're complaining about, if that makes sense. So yeah. I think I have a real issue with that. I think it should be separate.
This look, this book, this from Pariah to Partner by David Tobus. He was contacted by an anonymous benefactor who had millions of dollars. I think it was $5 or $6 million that she eventually donated by David Tobus to set up this independent funding philanthropic, which is another word for nice people giving money away to worthwhile causes, just giving money away for anything that would help children be together with their parents again. So I take what you're saying, Clinton. Of course, that would be the case. Mm. So one thing on the child protection page we actually have asked for, if anybody's hasn't made a will, it would be nice if you might want to bequeath. If you're running out of benefactors, contact me, or you put something in your will so that your assets can be bequeathed to the Child Protection Party. And so if you know anybody who's just close to or hasn't got a will, it might be an idea to have a chat to them about it.
Thanks, Paul.
Just need one person.
Yep, that's so true. And we're
Forest.
And we're more that would be nice. And we're more than welcome to receive any donations from anybody at this particular point in time. I just want to make a couple of points that Paul had made, and just want to elaborate them on slightly before we get to Clinton. And that is that there is the Riley Foundation, and we do primarily work with parents whose kids have been removed, and that I agree wholeheartedly with Paul. It is important in most cases to have somebody with you present when you're meeting with the department, so that you can talk about, or so that you can have recorded the things that are said that sometimes are questionable by the other party. And it also helps sometimes, I think, to be able to maintain some sort of collegial, some sort of understanding, rather than one party, particularly the parent, getting really upset and behaving in ways which are unhelpful. Having an advocate there can kind of put a cover on all of that. And prevent it from happening. So, and also I think an advocate can help to understand where the parents are coming from, and often be able to speak on their behalf when those parents are too emotional and unable to do so. So advocates are great. That's the reason why we have the Riley Foundation. If anybody wants to contact us at the Riley.Foundation, that's THREILY.Foundation, please feel free to do so. And one of our advocates from around Australia will get back to you and help you wherever we can. The other thing too that Paul raised, which I thought was really interesting, Paul, was really around the challenging of social workers and the asking of questions in court. I actually believe that solicitors do not understand what social workers are supposed to do. They do not understand the ethical background from which social workers come, and they don't understand the code of ethics which govern the way social workers should behave. And I can never understand why it is that those particular issues, which are evident when you read through the code of ethics, I can never understand why they're not fully comprehended or implemented within the court process. You know, one of the things that I think is really, I would love to have been a solicitor. I wished I had, when I finished my degree, actually gone off and done law, because I think that there's many things that that we believe as social workers, and Clinton may agree with this, that are not upheld by our colleagues, regretfully, and impacts the way the department behaves at the end of the day. I mean, one of the things that I primarily am concerned about is that social workers are not members of the Australian Association of Social Workers, and therefore they don't have to abide by that particular code of ethics. And I think Paul raised this at our last meeting about registration of social workers, and it would go a long way to making social workers accountable to not just the profession, but also the people primarily whom they represent. And you know, one of the things too that you know, to ask a social worker whether they are a member of the ASW, number one. Number two question is, when they're not, why aren't you? And number three question is, do you abide by the ASW Code of Ethics? Well, if you abide by the ASW Code of Ethics, why therefore are you behaving the way that you are, and why aren't you a member of the association? You know, and it sort of puts their credibility to the test. We expect a psychologist who's doing assessments to be a member of the Australian Psychological Association. We expect a doctor to be a member of the AMA. Why is it that we wouldn't expect social workers to be a member of their association as well? It just doesn't make sense. Yet at the end of the day, it's the social workers that make the decisions that's going to impact primarily what happens to kids. So I think the court process, or the way that it's handled, could change, because at the end of the day, if we challenge social workers about their professional integrity, and they know that that's going to happen when they go to court, perhaps, just perhaps, they may change their behaviour. So moving on, we'll go to
Tony.
Sorry, yep.
Yeah, before we go to Clinton, we've had a bunch of comments have come in around the things that Paul was saying when he was talking about asking a lawyer to, if you can record the meeting, or making notes of, you know, in answer to the questions, having a list of questions, etc. D. Michelle says that's good advice from Paul. You know, I agree with her.
I have to agree with her.
I know you do. Deb Stevens says that when he was talking about funding, she said, not funding for caseworkers, we need funding for support workers to work with families before children are taken. And I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
If we had these support workers, it would lessen the caseworker workload. Mm-hmm. Where's the next one? She says that there's a lot of comments from Deb Stevens there. Thank you, Deb. She says half of them could probably be done at home with suitable support. Yeah. She asked the question, how do we get the proposition for support workers on the table at Parliament? Can we advocate via our local members? I would suggest that everybody writes their local MP. We could even draft a standard letter that they could all print out and send on to their local MP saying we need funding for support workers like advocates, etc.
Yep, I agree.
Okay.
Maybe that's something we could talk about later, Avery, and put into place. I think that's a good idea. And have it on our webpage.
There's quite a few other comments there from Deb, but we've taken up quite a bit of time. So move on to Clinton.
Beautiful. Go, Clinton.
Hello, I'm from Western Australia. I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about our Aboriginal policy reference group that we have started over the last couple of weeks. We want to get a group of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people together across Australia. And we would just want to draft a policy, and I'd say a broad policy, because obviously every state and territory is going to be different. I'm pretty much just here to drive the discussion and take notes, but it's basically the people who are joining the group are going to help and shape and form the policy.
Can you update us, Clinton, as to how that has progressed since? I mean, I know it hasn't been a very long time, so I'm not expecting all that much, but can you let us know how that's progressed?
It's going really well, really well. We've had a lot of responses back from people. I've got a few meetings set up next week to go and meet some ladies in person. We have a lot of Zoom meetings. There's also a lot of stuff happening in the background here in WA. I guess the key primary legislation that deals with children's interests and their well-being is up for question at the moment. It's a pretty big act. I think it's the Children and Community Services Act 2004. So there's a lot of movement in WA in regards to that, and that all slides into our policy reference group. So it's really good, actually. There's a lot of discussion happening about policy at the moment.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Thanks, mate. You're doing some great work, Clinton, and we're really proud of the work you are doing and the impact that you're going to have on that particular cohort. Thanks, mate. And also, I don't know, is Narelle back? Narelle is back. She had vanished. And well, she might have, well, who knows what she's been doing when she vanished. But anyway, Narelle, we were going to play a video that you put together, a fabulous, fabulous video. And where I think Avery's going to put in the comment section that particular video. So I just want you to talk a little bit perhaps about the video itself and the reason why you put it together and some background on it, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So the video is dealing with a few cases, runs through a few cases on, well, I titled it The Stupid Reasons That Child Protection Takes Children For. Obviously, sometimes there are some serious reasons, and we often assume, of course, that if child protection is involved, it must be for a serious reason. But in a great deal of cases, this isn't the case. And so the video runs through 3 cases, which are just stunning. The just ridiculous reasons that children are taken. The first case is because the parents had fed the children dessert before dinner, and that was considered to be neglect and not seeing to their nutritional needs. So it was actually inspired by Avery because in one of our discussions I'd been talking about some of the evidence that child protection produces when they're taking children and complaining about it. And Avery said, well, we need to see evidence of this. We need to see what's really going on. So I thought, right, challenge accepted. So these ones are actually US cases, but we want to do a series on Australian cases. I've already had quite a few people contact me this morning after releasing the video, wanting to tell their stories, which is fantastic. And so.
Great. And I think one of the things that you and I talked about was an idea that I had some years ago that I began to put together but never completed, regretfully, was a documentary. So, and there's 2 things out of this, I think, Narelle. Number one was the idea about a documentary, and the other one was about putting together, 2 or 3 minute videos around the reasons why children, not the reasons why, how it felt for parents to have their children removed. And so have you any thoughts about that? And how would you like to run that? Would you like people to contact you directly to have conversations with you about that? Or would you prefer to do it through Avery or myself? Or what would be the best thing for you?
I don't mind either way. I think both would work. I think that could be very, very helpful. I think it's very difficult for people outside of the situation to understand the incredible grief that a family goes through when their child's removed, and this affects the whole family. I'm grandmother, and I don't think people understand how it's the little things that you miss. It's the being able to bake cookies with them. It's being able to read them a story at night. Every holiday, like Easter, Christmas, So, excuse me for getting emotional. So yeah, I think it's important that we acknowledge that grief in parents, and be able to have a place to express it, because there's a lot of inherent shame that comes with it, because people do assume that if a child's taken, you must have done something horrible to them. It's not always the case at all. In fact, it seems to be often not the case. And I think it's important to acknowledge families' grief, and just how this affects so many people. It affects the parents, it affects grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, and of course the children themselves. So
Yes, and I think it's something that we all need to consider as a way by which we can express how that moment. I personally know what it's like to lose a couple of kids to the system through the family court. So I understand that the emotional drain that it has on you, losing your children under any circumstance, is immense. And it's losing a child through death is one thing. Losing a child because you can't have contact with them for other reasons, or limited contact, or in my case, no contact at all, basically, it can be extremely devastating. So, and to be able to document that so that people can hear what's happened to others may help them to work through that particular struggle themselves and to deal with their grief.
exactly, and know that they're not alone, and that we're all in this together. We're trying to help them. We're trying to help each other. So yeah, I think it's important that people know they're not alone in this.
Yep, spot on. So before we conclude, thanks, Narelle, for all of that. And I just suggest too that people access your video. It's up on our Facebook page, I think, already. So track it down, find it, share it. It's really important video.
And if anyone, sorry, Tony, if anyone has does want to share their story with us, obviously in Australia there are certain legal restrictions, but we'll redact names, and obviously we won't be mentioning any children. But yeah, definitely contact us and we'll see where we go.
Okay, and I noticed
Tony?
that we've got Wendy on board.
Yeah, Wendy.
So hello, Wendy.
Hi guys, how you going?
Good. You've been able to hear any of our conversations so far?
Yeah, most of it actually.
Oh, very good. Amongst all your children duties,
Yes.
of which there are many, I hasten to add.
Yes.
So do you want to add anything to anything that we've said, or anything about the adoption stuff that you were part of as well?
Yeah, Avery asked me if I could get a chance to link in just to talk about the adoption stuff and start that process. So the main thing that I wanted to discuss was how it is actually operated in Victoria, where I am. So we don't generally have adoption as an option in the child protection system, which I professionally and personally agree with, that for it not to be as a policy. We have permanent care, and permanent care is where after 2 to 4 years you have a child in your care, you can go through the process of having them placed permanently in your care without severing ties to the family of origin, but removing the department from the equation, which usually makes less complications. So the children do not get their birth certificates changed or their names changed. DHHS is in Victoria. They still help compensate financially in a small way the permanent carer to make sure the children get everything they need. There's also a package that's put in place throughout the permanent care process to make sure all schools are covered, camps, shoes, any upcoming dentists or braces, that kind of thing, so the kids are well looked after. And there's provisions put in place, so there must be contact with the families at least 6 times a year. And seeing, listening to Narelle talk and how emotional she got, when the department step out, if you are a good carer, a really good carer, permanent carer, you can have those Christmas days and birthdays with the kids and have a rapport and a relationship with the permanent carer, so that child doesn't disappear out of the lives of the parents and the extended family. And I believe to gather permanency for the children is what is required, but without removing their family of origin. And I believe that's the best case scenario that the system could possibly offer.
And so, are you saying that your version of this is that you'd recommend something like permanent care, but certainly a child not losing their identity in terms of their birth certificate, change of name, and the other things that concern adoptees?
Yes, I think that's a middle ground. So the kids still see the natural parents, they still see extended family. It's left up to the family and the permanent carer to work things out, and the department completely step out of the equation. So the permanent carer ends up with guardianship and custody, but legally the child still is a part of the family of origin.
What I always get a little confused though as to how that works. I mean, there are some parents who have a child that's in their permanent care, whether we call it adoption or whatever, and they're resistant, I guess, about maintaining those connections with the biological family and the extended family for that matter. Do you see ways by which we can sort of mitigate all of that or overcome it?
It can be really difficult if you get a carer with that stance, but the orders are actually made in court. So that's where the biological family can go back to the court and state that the contact isn't being maintained, and then DHS can get re-involved again, or the department can get re-involved, or the courts can court order that the original orders have to be acknowledged and stand.
We know that in South Australia, it's unlikely that the court will step in and issue orders around access. And I know that I appreciate that in other states it may be different. Is that different in Victoria?
Yes. So if you go under a permanent care order, you must maintain access at least 4 to 6 times a year, or more if you require. But the minimum is 4 to 6 times per year. And if you have a good working relationship with the family, you can work it out to be once a month and every birthday and Christmas. So you have to really work on the relationship at the same time to make sure that that's maintained.
So you're saying that you're saying it's integral that the relationship between the permanent carer and the biological family is integral in making sure that this works.
Personally, I believe so. Yes, I've worked really hard to make that happen in my case. And we facilitate weekly contact, and that's what works for the child, because that's who I work for, is the child. That's the best interest of the child is paramount. So
you're saying that in your case, it's exceptional. Well, I would argue, Wendy, that's because you are. But I don't. So I guess my concern is that there will be those parents, those permanent parents, whatever they call them, who will see the child as their property and will refuse to allow such access. And I think that's a hurdle that at some point we need to find a way to overcome.
Yes, I agree. There is definitely carers out there that would go down that path. And that's where you've got the court order in place so that the parents have something to come back with. And unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't work. The only solace there is that at the end of the day, it's the permanent carers who are going to be shunned by the children when they're older, and the children will gravitate back towards the family of origin because they have been done wrong by.
Yep, and you're right. And kids work it out in the end, don't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Particularly when they have conversations with their biological parents and they tell them that, I tried to contact you. I wanted to see you once a fortnight or once a week, and I wanted to see you on birthdays, but I wasn't allowed to. And that eventually comes out, I guess it comes back to biting the permanent carer in the arse.
Yeah,
basically.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I was just wondering whether training or assessing parents foster carers, whatever we care to call them, whether that also may need to be changed so that we weed out those people that have got unhelpful attitudes towards biological parents.
Yeah, there's a process in Victoria where it's not always the person who's been caring for the child that ends up with permanent care. They generally assess 3 carers at the same time. Obviously, the person who's already got the relationship with the children are at the top of that. But if I know of a lady who had a baby in her care for 18 months and went put in a permanent care order request, and they assessed her and 2 other carers, and one of the other carers received permanent care of that child. So there is quite a process that you have to go through. You have to be assessed for financial stability, future planning for the children, and it's not done by the department or any of the foster care agencies around. It's done by a separate agency that is not governed by that system.
So I see someone on the Facebook feed that says, no, Victoria has a bad policy. I don't know, Deb, what you're referring to there, but perhaps if you could maybe contact Wendy and have a conversation with her about things that you might disagree with around that. That would be good. Does that make sense, Wendy? Is that all right?
Yep, certainly.
Deb also said that addressing Wendy, it said that would be too hard on the family of the children and the child.
And I guess it's important that we have this discussion. There will be people that will disagree vehemently with the notion of permanency anyway, that notion itself, plus, what does that look like in terms of future involvement with the biological family? And I think, as I've already highlighted, there'll be issues that will need to be resolved at some point along the way. Wendy, look, thanks for all the work you're doing in that area. I am really looking forward to seeing how the committee that you're running around that eventuates, and some of the ideas you come up with that you can put to the party so we can develop whatever policy needs to be developed in that particular area. And the same with Clinton around the Indigenous policy as well, because I think that's pretty important. So I'd like to thank everybody for having contributed today. I'd like to thank for the hundreds of people that actually have logged on. It's nearly up to 500 people, I think. So thanks for being a part of this. If people were watching it on YouTube, I have the sense that all the videos, that the flashing over to my other screen and having to get the audio from that didn't happen. So I'll check that out in a moment. But I'm sure this page could be shared to Facebook later on. To YouTube later on. So I just want to thank everybody again for being a part of this, and stick around afterwards so we can have a chat offline. And I wish you all the best, and also have a look at that video that Narelle's put together. It's absolutely fabulous. So thanks for being with us. Join the Child Protection Party. If you've got any issues, you go direct to the Riley Foundation and look at our help page and be able to let us know what sort of assistance you require. And that, I mean, from that, we have, we get heaps and heaps of messages each day asking for help around Australia. We are unfunded. We do need some money in order to be able to do that work more efficiently and effectively, and have some professional staff working with us. So it's important that if you can find a way to contribute to the Riley Foundation, you do so. Avery, you got any parting words?
We've had a lot of comments, and I think that far too many for us to go through. I think what you and I need to do once this is all finished is to go through them and try and reply where we can, where we can offer an appropriate response to them. And thank you to everybody who did comment and who joined us.
And we can also send a response to feed those off to Clinton and to Tony and to Paul and to Wendy and to Nadia and Narelle where necessary, so that they can also respond.
Yep.
So thanks everybody. Thanks for being with us. In 4 weeks' time, we'll be holding another one of these virtual town halls, talking about another topic that will be of interest, I'm quite sure, to all of you. So thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.